Hey, Brooks.
Hey,
Great
Brian.
having you here today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, very interested in talking about kind of coal plants, the coal ash discussion that's going on. Got a lot of people looking at coal plants staying on, not staying on, retiring, the liability of coal ash. Know that EPA is taking a strong look at this. And while there are regulations in place, still a little bit unsettled, don't you think?
Absolutely. And it's funny, I guess all the thought leadership these days is about the energy transformation in this country and what's next. But I think there needs to be a little bit more thought leadership in what do we do with the legacy sites and the legacy of a couple hundred years of coal burning for electric power production. So in my space, in this world of coal ash, it was a watershed moment in 2015 when EPA promulgated the first national rules. It was a huge moment because EPA had previously proposed alternatively to regulate coal ash as hazardous waste or non-hazardous waste. And to have gone down the first path would have been billions of dollars and a lot of emotional energy and litigation and compliance and enforcement. So we thought the path of non-hazardous solid waste regulation created a lot of opportunity to prudently close out these units, deal with corrective action where required, and move on.
Right.
And as you say, that was over 8 years ago. And yet we find ourselves now on this plane of vast confusion because of litigation and changes in interpretation and a little interference from Congress to establish state permit programs. But we are now in a moment where, for compliance counseling purposes, it is incredibly hard to make good future-looking judgments about how best to deal with the legacy of coal ash.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also probably because people are looking at the issue in different ways. So you've got the classic, because of the transition to renewable energy, the transmission to carbon-free, carbon neutral, whatever the term you want to use is, that means a lot of coal plants are going to get retired. So that's the classic, right? Retired, got the coal ash. How do we deal with that liability? Do we have to dig it up? What do we have to do with it? I said, but then, because these coal sites have good infrastructure for other potential uses, especially other energy projects, maybe even renewable energy projects, it's like, okay, got this nice asset, has this liability, coal ash. I said, and in addition, you have utilities or other companies that are like, okay, I've got this great site, maybe I need to repower it. And so, Atlanta's a good one where we had a coal plant repurposed to be a natural gas plant. So there's all these options, but there's this liability sitting there, that coal ash liability and all those options.
Yeah, spot on. And we thought that the rules answered that question pretty directly by saying an active facility for regulatory purposes had to be a coal-fired power plant. But that too has been reinterpreted to mean any power production of any kind, with or without a fuel source, which could pick up wind, solar, battery storage, natural gas. And then if you're an active facility and you've transitioned, you still have that liability of dealing with the coal ash.
And actually, that's interesting you say that, because that's the one thing that I think catches some folks off guard, is that once you touch that land, aren't you basically jointly and severally liable with everybody else who's touched that land?
Yeah, spot on. You're owner, operator, both responsible.
Yeah.
So
some people don't know that. At first.
Which can be perilous, because there are lots of market opportunities. As you say, these plants tend to be in great locations for infrastructure. They were purpose-built and purpose-located, but they might be tough to take on for some future purpose until the landscape clears up a little bit and those liabilities are addressed.
Yeah, exactly. I think what I've seen in terms of the transition is that people are definitely looking for different uses, but there's a lot of new entrants who don't necessarily know power, and they just know renewable energy is a good thing, and I'm going to go and invest in that, want to do that. And I think what they miss out on in terms of the coal ash, or any liabilities associated with whatever it is, brownfield, coal ash, whatever it is, what they think is that, I'll just get an indemnity for that. When you have an indemnity, or when you cover that risk, well, where's the money that's going to backstop hundreds of millions of dollars of risk, or maybe, I mean, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, $1 billion of
Could be
risk.
billions of dollars.
I mean, you know, so yeah.
It strikes me in my space in the environmental world as one of those classic situations where something that was permissible for a century is no longer permissible.
Yeah.
But to change the rules and apply them retroactively creates lots of these liability questions. And coal ash, of course, has been used throughout our nation's history as structural fill, road bed. It's everywhere. It's in Portland cement. And there are well-recognized beneficial uses of coal ash, where its qualities as a byproduct of burning coal are, you know, scientifically sound and justified. But if you revisit those decisions made decades ago and say that a coal plant built up over the years with coal ash as fill is now entirely a cleanup site that needs to be dug up and remediated, that's a tough pivot for business purposes.
No, agreed. And it is funny, when I first started working on projects, I remember the first coal project I worked on, they're like, man, we're gonna make tons of money on cement blocks or something like that. It was like, oh, we're gonna reuse this coal ash for whatever. And I was like, oh, cool, that's cool, I didn't know that. And you're absolutely right, that was 20 something years ago. And now it's like,
And there are some incredible demonstration projects, including by some of our clients, to show what can be done with coal ash in an environmentally protective way. The problem is the clock is ticking.
Yes.
And there's not enough time to deal with, you know, thousands of cubic yards of coal ash buried across the country according to the regulatory deadlines to get rid of it. And so some of those opportunities may be lost or squandered because there's simply not enough time to effectuate them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's interesting too, because you speak about time. I also think, you know, people are trying to get to carbon zero, carbon neutral, but also just the fact that you have folks, you know, have this capacity crunch that's occurring right now. It feels like across the nation, utility companies are looking around going, you know, we have these wonderful lights shining on us right now. They won't, you know, if you don't have the capacity, then all of a sudden these lights aren't turned on. And so coal might stay on longer. The repowering we were talking about before, all these things become more real, but it's because of this liability issue that, hey, is that capacity, is keeping that coal open a good idea? Is dealing with, you know, trying to figure out this liability and bake that into the cost of what this capacity might be, suddenly becomes, oh, for the short term especially, and the short term could be longer than 5 years, could be 10 years, could be a little while. When I say short term, I mean almost like under 20 years, right? And so could make it that, hey, even with that liability, I need the capacity, I need to keep the lights on. And a utility company is going to say, it's much more important to keep the lights on than pretty much anything else.
And here's the dilemma. I know that there are outspoken governors and state legislatures focused really on capacity and reliability that would desperately like to see some of these plants continue operating.
Right.
Or perhaps convert to natural gas and continue to operate. The regulatory framework that we have in place today compelled all of the utilities across the country to stop disposing of their ash as of April 2021. And so any continued generation has this massive byproduct that has to be sent someplace else. And I don't think it's possible to permit new disposal capacity or truck it or barge it or rail it off-site for several hundred miles and make that a viable proposition. If we could solve that, then we might also solve the demand growth issue.
Yeah, exactly. So it's tough because the hard part is it all adds cost. It adds risk because of the unknowns that we were talking about before. And so it just becomes a thorny issue that you just do the best you can right now and see where we go from there.
Yeah. It's also interesting to me that we are in a polarized world on the environmental front in particular. And it used to be that euphemistically coal was a four-letter word, right? The war on coal was to stop coal-fired generation.
Right.
And now coal ash is, you know, the next euphemistic four-letter word, and it's eliminated at all costs, because the fear of environmental disaster or environmental contamination or worse is so present now in the narrative that it has become this kind of sacred proposition that you cannot simply bury it in place and put a liner on it and move on. And I think that this particular administration and all of the focused environmental groups, want to change direction and say the only safe option is to dig it up. And at some sites, the difference between properly closing it in place with a liner versus digging it up is a multi-billion-dollar delta.
Right.
And that has to go through state utility commissions, that has to go to either ratepayers or shareholders, and that, until there are clear rules that say you have to do this or you can't do that, it's very difficult to go through the normal regulatory approval process. So it is very unsettled, and it, as I said at the start, it is tough counseling with so much uncertainty and so much bound up in the courts and in the administrative agencies. But hopefully we're trending toward some outcome where we can have some form of all of the above energy supply, at least for some period of time, until we bridge to the new energy sources.
I agree 100%, because it's hard to be able to say to folks, this is how it's going to be. And I think there are a lot of folks who, hey, I realize it's going to cost a lot. I'd rather know how much.
Right.
Just tell me how much. The not knowing is the hardest part.
Right. And it is all about certainty. We lived through one of the first trials in the country involving coal ash, and took it up on appeal and won on this proposition of how can you safely dispose of coal ash, only to see our state legislature turn around a year later and compel a different outcome, but provided for cost recovery.
Oh, okay.
And it provided the certainty that the utility needed in order to progress in that direction. And it's not are you for or against a different regulatory outcome? It's tell us what is required. And of course, everybody's motivated to do what is required.
And that obviously then helps with, in my field, with the transactions, the risk allocation, what it is, who takes what, that type of thing. It just makes those things easier where people actually will do the deals versus how do I price it? And then people are like, I don't know.
Right.
So
I'd be curious in your space with the emergence of environmental liability transfer companies, if there is an opportunity for those enterprises to come in and propose to take on the risk, take on that owner-operator role, and let utilities walk away. I don't know if that's happening or not.
Yeah, I don't think it's happening, but I also think it's because of everything we've been talking about, is that it's so uncertain that
you can't quantify it.
Correct, you can't quantify it. I think once it becomes more certain, you've seen it in different areas, the tax credits or other environmental aspects, where folks will come in, it's because they know the liability they're taking on, or reps warranties insurance or anything like that. They're like, okay, I know what it is, I can quantify it. This is a difficult area because hard to quantify.
Yeah, and you mentioned insurance earlier, and I'm always fascinated by the opportunity for an insurance product to deal with an environmental problem. I understand that there are products that exist that in theory could deal with this, at least for cost certainty. So you might project a cleanup and then have a cap above which insurance kicks in. But I think that those providers also struggle to define that number. And that's where the real magic happens. How much are you covered for?
Exactly. So, but it's, again, I just say such a thorny issue, such an issue that, smarter people than me will be able to resolve at some point, perhaps. But it's all bound up in kind of the political and the what's the right outcome and those types of things. It's not. I don't know that there's an easy answer. Well, there is an easy answer, possibly. Put a number on it.
Right.
But how do you get there?
Yeah, completely agree.
Yep. Brooks, it's been great talking to you today. I think it's a real important issue, and I'm glad we were able to talk about it.
Same here. I feel like we could keep talking for hours or revisit this every couple months and something would have changed.
I agree. you.